Life.Church created this podcast because we all need healthy conversations with real people. So this podcast is here to help you start conversations with your life group, friends, and family. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to the You've Heard It Said podcast. This is Jason.
And this is Allie.
And Allie, I feel like it's been a long time since we've heard one of your rants.
Oh, no.
So I'm going to try to get you going. Why don't you talk to us about airline safety?
No. Okay, to be clear, I don't have any beef with the safety presentation.
I just know you could probably go on and on about it.
Okay, no, I don't have issues with the presentation. I have issues with people who don't pay attention to the presentation. It's my biggest pet peeve if people are in the aisle seats where they're like, okay, are you equipped to help people in case of emergency? And they're just like flipping through Skyline magazine or they're on their phones, which are probably not in airplane mode. Thank you very much. And it's like, no, if you are in the safety row, it is your responsibility to take care of the well-being of everybody on this plane. Yep. So if I'm in that safety row, you better believe I am ready. If something happens, I'm going to take care of us.
I thought you might be able to have some thoughts about that. So the reason I brought it up is because I have listened to the safety presentation.
Good. Thank you.
And there's also this metaphor that I've heard people use a lot, but I think it's worth repeating. That when they talk about the oxygen mask, people will say, well, you've got to make sure you put yours on first before helping someone else. Because if you don't have oxygen, then you're not going to be able to help like your kid or someone next to you for very long. And the metaphor is true in so many parts of life. When it comes to our well-being, I think we're tempted to ignore our own health so that we can try to help others. Or maybe we're only focused on our own health. Either of those things happen. But what ends up happening as a result is we hurt other people when we're not healthy ourselves.
Right. But I think it's really hard when you think about how often Jesus told us to deny ourselves and to serve others and to love others.
Right. But if you look at Matthew 22:39, Jesus says that the two most important commandments are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus is acknowledging that our ability to love others often depends on our ability to love ourselves.
That's true. But I mean, there's still some tension in there, right? Like we have to love ourselves so that we can love others. But we are also called to deny ourselves.
Yeah, so I think we're tempted to go to unhealthy extremes on either side of this, right? We either overemphasize loving ourselves, which is where you get some of that far end of the self-care culture that we see today, or we underemphasize loving ourselves, which makes us like a bunch of resentful martyrs who think that we're the secret to saving the world, which I've been there, when we're not at all.
Right. I think you brought up something important, which is the whole self-care industry. Like right now, it's really trendy to post about self-care. In fact, during 2020 alone, there were 44 million social media posts about self-care.
Wow.
And there's some good things about that. But putting on a face mask and lighting a candle and having a cup of tea is not going to fix your well-being. And it also just kind of feels unattainable. I mean, if you like those things, go for it. Like those are great. But they're really just surface level fixes for what's often a bigger problem.
Allie, I feel like you're picking on my face mask in my cup. Okay, seriously. When we looked into this, we found that the Harris Poll, which is a market research company, surveyed 1,000 people in 2019. And they discovered that 28% of them reported feeling guilty when they practiced self-care. 35% said they believed it's only possible for people with enough money. And 44% said it's only possible for people who have enough time.
Right, which is terrible odds for something that's marketed to help you. But we know that there's way more to well-being and wellness than self-care. In fact, if we're relying on ourselves to fix anything, we're probably going to have a problem.
That's a good point. And that's why today we're talking all about well-being. It's one of the areas that Life.Church is passionate about because God wants wellness for all of us.
And I think so often it's tempting to think that God only cares about our spiritual health, but He created our bodies, minds, and spirits, and so He cares about all of it.
And then when we follow Jesus, God's Spirit literally lives inside of us. Just look at 1 Corinthians 3:16. It says, "Don't you realize that all of you together are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God lives in you?" That's why we work towards well-being, but it's also how we work towards it, with the Spirit of God empowering us to do that. And I think we have to acknowledge that all of us will have very different needs when it comes to our well-being, and that we're all starting from very different places with what we need. but all of those needs matter to God.
And we're going to start off by hearing from the program director of Branch 15, Terry Gordonier, who has this unbelievable story about how people came alongside her to restore her well-being in the middle of a truly awful situation. And then we'll bring back our unofficially official podcast therapist, Kay Gackle, to help us have a better idea of what well-being is and how we care for our own and others' well-being and what Jesus has to say about all of this. Terry, welcome to the You've Heard It Said podcast. I really believe that your story is going to inspire and challenge us. I wondered if you could just start there. Could you tell us a little bit about your story and how you got involved with Branch 15?
Sure, I'll try to make that as simple as possible. So I was a bus kid in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I rode the church bus and accepted Christ. I rode the bus because my mom didn't go to church, and my dad was abusive, and so they had us divorced when I was 7. But I just remember going and hearing about Jesus, and salvation was awesome, and unfortunately no discipleship, right? And so just growing up in a home that was not necessarily physical abusive anymore because my dad was gone, but my mom had just suffered some really huge mental health issues because of that abuse. And it was back in the 70s when we didn't talk about domestic violence. And so she just didn't know what she didn't know. She did absolutely the best she could, but just never had confidence and security in who I was. Always trying to fill that void, a void only God can fill. I was married at 23, kind of living life and just doing the things, and started to try to have children and had 3 miscarriages. And people asked me, like, were you mad at God? No, I kind of thought he was mad at me. I didn't really take the time to process that or look at that. And then when I was 34, I had been married almost 14 years, and my husband passed away suddenly. Just his heart just stopped driving home from work. And so I was actually pregnant at the time. And it was just one of the darkest moments of my life. So what I felt was that I was alone, and that anyone that I felt like loved me or could love me was gone. I ended up on a downhill spiral. So there was just a lot of grief, which clouded a lot of judgment, but added to all the lies I had believed in my early teenage years and 20s. I entered a relationship very quickly after my husband passed that ended up being extremely abusive. And it was rough for a long time, and it was really dark. So a couple of months after my husband passed, I miscarried the 4th child. And I was just like, there's nothing to live for, nothing left. I just remember feeling like I walked around in this fog of grief. I mean, I was living. I was going to work every day. I was living-ish after being told after the 4th miscarriage I could not have children. I was 37, and I worked for 2 OBGYNs in Tulsa. And with my medical history, I had gone in and told one of them, I just don't feel well. So that's a Friday afternoon. I go in Monday morning for an ultrasound. And the ultrasound tech, she's smiling ear to ear, and she's asking me these questions. And I look at her and I said, am I pregnant? And she's like, yes. And her heart rate's 174. And here she is. And so we could tell it was a girl, all the things, right?
My goodness. Wow, what a surprise.
Right? And so to me, it was God's way of just saying, like, I'm not done. And here is this beautiful gift. And so I'm pouring all my identity into being a mom. But again, still living in the situation we were living in, got worse. And I realized, okay, it's not just about me now. She's going to get hurt. And she's going to get hurt severely, whether it be physically or emotionally. I tried to leave a couple of times and didn't really have the backbone to stay gone. And so the 3rd time I tried to leave, there was quite a bit of violence. I had my daughter in my arms and being punched in the face. And so it was so close to her head. And so I picked up what was closest and I threw a wrench. And I hit him. So I had a felony charge for assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. And so we left and drove a long way. Went to Montana for years. Didn't know anybody there.
Wow. So you go to Montana not knowing anybody. What happens when you get there?
God was just all over that. People were like, you didn't know anybody? Weren't you scared? And I was like, I was so more fearful of staying than I was of going. Because at that point, it really was about just surviving. I literally drove until I felt safe. There was a little office there that gave me a job, and so we found a little apartment right away. We had a church family up there. Everything was just kind of falling into place. My daughter was just able to see a different way of life. We actually lived there for about 3.5 years until I was arrested and came back to Oklahoma to serve my time for that crime. And then at that time, between the county jail time of sitting and waiting, I served a total of 22 months being incarcerated. My church family just kind of stuck by me as I served my time. And when I was released from prison, they actually came from Montana in their fifth wheel to get me. And so the plan was I had a job there, I had a house there, going to start over, and then I would start saving up money for the legal process and all that to regain custody. And there's this little package of paperwork when you're a felon that if you want to go to a different state, they have to approve it. And so everybody was like, it'll be fine. You've got all the things they want. And so they did my paperwork and they denied it.
Oh, wow.
So literally, my friends from Montana, their names are Bonnie and Randy. So they literally are like, we're going to put you up in this hotel, the Home 2 Suites, where it has a kitchen and it's safe and all that. And I'm there, I'm by myself. They go back. I'm literally like praying, Lord, why don't you just keep me in prison? Like, why? I don't get it. Like, I'm so confused right now. And I reached out to one of the volunteer chaplains when I was in prison at Eddie Warrior, and I just called her and said, I don't have any idea what God is doing. I'm here in this place all by myself, and I'm scared, but I feel like God's got a plan. I just don't know what it is, and so could you just pray with me? And, of course, she did. And then she said, you know what? I have a friend that I'm going to call. I think she's pretty close to where you're at, and I may just have her come by and check on you. And I said, okay, that'd be great. So that friend's name was Tammy Franklin, and at the time, she was the executive director for Branch 15.
Wow.
So she came by literally to pray with me and just started talking to me, like, what if you fill out an application? So I filled out this app, and there's no beds. So, okay, I fill it out anyway. And that evening, there became a bed available. And 4 months later, I had the privilege of being the first client to become a staff member.
Oh, my goodness. Well, thank you so much for sharing that story with us. One of the things that we're talking about in this episode is about well-being. And so as you're reflecting on your story and all of the different things that people did for you, what are some things that stuck out to you that people did to support your well-being?
I remember when I finally made the decision to leave, just things just falling into place, and the kindness of strangers that didn't even know me. But yet I know God put them in my path to do a certain thing. So the apartment that we got in Montana, we literally looked at an ad, didn't have much money, right? But as we're filling out the application and I'm talking to this gentleman and his wife, my daughter is standing here who's about to be 5 years old, and their 5-year-old had been killed in that car wreck a year before that. And so they saw us, and they were believers, and they were like, we don't know why, but we feel led to help you. I had asked if they could hold the apartment because I was going to be getting a paycheck and all the things, and he just looked at me and said, how about you just figure that out when you get paid and you guys go ahead and move in today?
Wow.
I didn't ask for that. It was just God. And I just remember every time somebody reached out with kindness, whether it be a kind word or something, I just remember thinking, God sent them in our path, and I know that He is taking care of us. There were so many times that I questioned being a good mom, right? Because it wasn't a good situation. And I remember sitting in church in Montana, and one day, one of the elders of the church came up and said, "You're really doing a good job as a mom." And I just remember just sobbing because I know that the Lord put that on His heart. So my well-being, there were so many people that spoke into that. But Allie, as I thought about well-being, really my well-being came from renewing my mind. I just began to speak truth, even when I didn't believe it, even when I would believe that it would be for someone else. But I just kept renewing my mind. At some point, I thought, okay, I'm not my circumstances. I'm not my bad decisions. I'm not my bad relationships. I'm not any of those things. God loves me for who I am, and now I just have to walk this out.
So you get connected to Branch 15. Tell me a little bit about what was that like for you?
There were just so many aha moments because at Branch 15, we're all about finding an appropriate voice. And so many of us feel like we don't have a voice, and then we don't use our voice, or we don't use it appropriately. I would sit in class, and I just remember thinking when she's talking about boundaries, and it's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to say no. And I'm thinking, has anybody ever said that to me in my life before? If they had, I didn't remember it. And it was like this revelation of God's word and these biblical principles that opened my eyes to, I don't have to be the person that doesn't have a voice anymore.
Wow. So you graduate from the program, and then you get to be the first one to come on staff afterward.
Yeah.
And so tell me what happened after that point in time.
I actually kind of finished the program while I was working. At that point, it was a year-long program, so I just kept on doing the classes and doing all the things, working for the branch, and we were growing at that time. So not soon after I started a branch, then not very long after that, I became a program manager, which is who lives in the home with the ladies and navigates that. I moved out of the location I was in and ran a home with 8 ladies for a while. And then I was promoted to program director. And so it's kind of been a whirlwind.
Yeah.
But I'm still all things client and ladies and classes and teaching. And that really is where my passion lies.
Wow. Well, congratulations on
Thank you.
that. So what's happening with your daughter while all of this is happening for you?
As soon as I was found, and my husband was able to get an emergency custody order and come and get her. And so he took her into his custody at that point. And so by the time I was released from prison, they had moved. And so we didn't really know where she was at the time. So at first, nothing, which was hard because as a mom, it felt like life was going on, but she wasn't with me yet. And I just kept praying. I just knew the Lord was going to do it. I just didn't know how. And so we had kind of talked about maybe hiring a private investigator. And now remember, I still have this group of community in Montana that are just supporting me like crazy, even though I'm in Oklahoma. And so I was at a worship night at Northwest. I'll never forget it. I just felt like the Lord said, you're not going to have to hire the private investigator. About less than 2 weeks later, her dad had posted something on Facebook and actually posted a school float and a picture of her on one. And so the pastor in Montana saw it immediately, took a picture of that and sent it to me.
Wow.
And within 2 hours, he had realized it and taken it down. So I had been praying because not everything in the legal system is all up and up, right? And so because of where I'd come from, I, one, didn't trust men, and I didn't really trust attorneys. And God knew that. And so he prepared an attorney that was just for me. This attorney had done some stuff for the branch. And so we reached out and asked if he would pray about maybe taking my custody case. And he prayed and said he would take it. In December 2018, we started the custody process. And we made trips back and forth 4 hours one way.
Oh, wow.
For 9 months, sometimes 2 or 3 a month. So the Lord just showed me that he was trustworthy, and he just fought for us like you can't even imagine. It wasn't easy, but we did it. And so my daughter came home for good in September of 2019.
Wow.
So she came home September 24th, 2019. I entered Branch 15 September 24th, 2017.
Oh, my goodness.
So she came home 2 years to the day.
Wow. What a picture of God working together in all things.
All things.
All things, even the things that we don't understand how he could possibly restore.
Yeah.
And he can do it.
Yeah.
So I want to ask something that people may have wondered. So your daughter was with your husband for a long time.
Yeah.
Was she okay? And then also, were there ever any charges for him for some of the things that had happened to you?
Okay, so I'll answer the second one first. So he has since passed away. Sometimes when people are in that state of mental health and they have used the system to survive, they know how to use the system. And so, no, there were not charges. And also, I will also say that I never filed any. Okay, so that's on me. I didn't feel safe to file them.
Yeah.
And so I didn't. So when I talk about the guilt and the shame of keeping my daughter in a situation, but again, God works all things for good.
Yeah.
So no, there were not any charges for him. Was my daughter okay? Yes and no. Of course, the minute I was arrested, I started praying for her.
Yeah.
And there were lots of people praying for her. And I believe that they protected her. And I believe God protected her. And she walked through a lot. That I wish she wouldn't have had to.
Thank you for sharing all of that, because I think it's really important for people to know, like you said earlier, that they're not alone.
No.
And that they can seek help and that they do have a voice. And so I want to thank you for being that voice for them. All of your story is such a picture of God restoring all things and redeeming all things. And so what is it like for you to be the program director of Branch 15 and help women who are coming through similar situations that you went through?
After my daughter came home, we started our mother-child program. And so we started having ladies being reunited with their children from different circumstances. And I truly believe that I walked through a lot of my custody stuff because I needed to be equipped to help the moms that walk through stuff now.
Yeah.
It's the best job in the world because, oh my gosh, that we have so many redemption stories in Branch 15, right? Mine is just a small one, but I can look at them and say, I have been there, and it can be different.
That's incredible. So you talked a little bit about it earlier, but I wondered if you could tell us about the work that Branch 15 does, specifically how it relates to well-being of the women who go through the program.
Absolutely. Everybody that comes into Branch 15, 100% of them come from trauma at some point in their life, right? Whether it been when they were 3 or whether it been yesterday. But we look at what that individual lady needs. So what does she need? And we look at 9 areas in her life. So all the things, mental health, budgeting, legal. Does she have legal things that she's trying to work through? Does she have custody, or is she coming out of incarceration and she's got $25,000 worth of fines and she's been back to prison twice because she couldn't get a ride to work the last couple of times and then she just gave up? Sometimes it sounds easy, but it's not. And then we look at the truth versus the lies, because the lies are just what she knows, and she knows them as truth. I knew those lies as truth. And it's just something that if we're going to break a generational cycle, if we're going to help, we're going to have to replace the lies with truth.
I love that you guys are focused on all of those different areas because they're all important, and in many ways they relate and compound on one another.
Yes.
What are some ways that people can get involved in Branch 15?
Oh my gosh, there are so many ways. So We say just 3 things. Prayer, people, provision. We just need a whole lot of all 3 of those, right? Everybody can pray, and prayer is what holds us together. Spiritual warfare can be just outrageous, right? And so I tell people, if you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you have Branch 15 on your mind, please just pray, because you have no idea the healing that's trying to happen or a breakthrough that lady is trying to get, right? So prayer is number 1. People is where we call our volunteers ambassadors. So we have all different roles. And then, of course, provision would be the financial piece, and God provides how he provides always. But a lot of different ways that people could help or serve. So you can provide a meal on Monday night when we have class. If you wanted to be on our ongoing needs team, which is just providing hygiene and sheets and bed pillows and things for when a lady first gets there and she doesn't have anything. Those are ongoing needs. Mentors, that's a bigger ask. But we partner with Stand in the Gap Ministries, and they put a team of 3 or 4 ladies around one of our clients, and they just walk through life for a year. But that builds that support system. It's that healthy support system of their community that they can go and say, this is what's happening, or how do I deal with this, or can you just listen?
That's so good. I love that. Thank you so much for the work that you and everyone at Branch 15 does. We are so thankful that we got to hear a small part of it today. Is there any final advice or encouragement that you would give to anybody who is seeking to restore their own well-being or the well-being of someone else?
What you feel you need is never too small to ask for. If you need help, it is not wrong to ask for help. Asking for help is courageous, and it is strong. And saying I'm not okay today, there's nothing wrong with that.
That's good. Well, thank you again, Terry. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. I was honored. Thank you.
So the original definition of well-being was the state of being comfortable, happy, and healthy. But really, over the years, many health professionals have elaborated on this, and they said it encompasses so much more, like our physical, our social, and our emotional, and that all of these contribute to our well-being. So we might be able to say that an easy way to define well-being is how well we are functioning. So a high well-being might include emotional stability or engagement, meaning, optimism, positive relationships, resilience, self-esteem, and vitality, so our physical energy. And when I list off those high well-being attributes, you can hear how trauma might impact these, right? Everyone experiences trauma in their life at some point. So some of us might have this big T trauma, those catastrophic events, or the little t trauma, these negative life events that still impact our functioning. And so when you have trauma, it impacts your brain. It impacts your amygdala, and this is your emotional response center. And this increases in function as it responds to a traumatic stimuli, while your hippocampus and your prefrontal cortex decrease in function. So that's your memory and your learning, your executive functioning, and your reasoning. So you can hear if you're reacting to a traumatic stimuli, your emotional response increases in function and your reasoning decreases in function. And you can really hear how that would impact your overall well-being. And then you can see how it's a domino effect. So then that would directly impact our relationships with God and with others and with ourselves. And then it's also going to impact our optimism, our ability to find meaning, our resilience, our vitality. So how much energy are we able to give to life when we're giving it all to this? So the question really becomes, how do we help ourselves and others when we are experiencing this kind of trauma with our well-being? And I think the first step is really simply acknowledging the trauma. If we think about how Jesus loved others, we see that over and over and over again, he just met people right where they were. If we take the woman at the well, he met her in the middle of the day at the well. No one went to the well because it was in a desert. No one was going in the middle of the day. But Jesus met her right where she was. And he would meet people always spiritually speaking, but he also met them often physically right where they were. And he knew that her trauma and past relationships was going to affect how well she could trust. And so he led the conversation with questions, and he listened, and with grace. And so if we're going to help other people, we can first acknowledge the trauma, And then we can listen to people, meet them right where they are, and lead the conversation with questions and with grace. I love that we also have a picture of Jesus where he pays attention to his own needs and the needs of others. But we see that he goes off in a remote place or in a boat or up on a mountainside. So he pays attention to the times that he needs to get away. But then he models it for his disciples. In Mark 6, he encouraged his disciples to go away with him to a quiet place and rest. And while they were doing that, they saw the big crowd of people who were also following them, and Jesus noticed them and he had compassion on them. And what we see here is that our well-being isn't just limited to how well we're doing, but it's also including the other people around us. So part of our functioning well, our abundant life, our high well-being includes our relationship with God and with others.
So every time I interact with Terry, I just feel inspired.
Yeah, but you've told me before you also get a little bit angry about it.
Yeah, I do. I do get really angry. It really frustrates me that she served time and her abusive husband didn't.
I think this helps us to see how much well-being matters. Like her husband's well-being isn't there, right? Her well-being as a result also isn't there. And Jesus steps in and is there for her. And I love that he used other people along the way to play a role in it. And that's what we all get to be a part of when we're obedient, to really see the people around us and love them the way that Jesus calls us to love them. And Jesus is such a good picture of this. In Mark 8:22 through 25, we see this group of people bringing a blind man to Jesus. And this story is so weird. Jesus does not immediately heal him. In fact, he doesn't heal him publicly. When you read it, Jesus takes him to a secluded place outside of the town where he spits on the man's eyes. Kind of weird.
Right?
And then Jesus asks the man whether or not he can see. I'm like, Jesus, you know the answer to this question, first of all. And also, why didn't you just heal him? And then the guy answers, and this first round, like he can't see all the way. He says that people look like trees walking around. And so there's some scholars that think that if this guy knew what trees looked like, then he probably had been able to see at some point, right? And that maybe it was scars or some kind of wound that took away his vision, and that Jesus spitting on his eyes would have soothed them. And this same gentleness is not only what began to heal the man physically, but it also built his faith spiritually in who Jesus was. And so in this story, we see Jesus care for someone's whole well-being. He heals his physical sight, he restores his spiritual blindness, and he protects his emotional well-being by taking him to a place where he's not on display for everyone to look at.
I love that. And I think there's so many ways that this story is applicable to us in all seasons of our lives. Like sometimes we're the blind guy in the story, right? Like we need other people to bring us to Jesus. And we need Jesus to do this healing work in our well-being. And other times we're the friends in the story and we're called to bring our neighbors to Jesus for healing. And it's going to keep flipping throughout this life because we're always going to need God and others.
So this week, here's a question to talk about with your life group, your friends, and your family. In what ways could I take a more active role in pursuing better well-being for myself and my neighbor?
Then do something about it. Maybe it's getting involved with a local mission partner like Branch 15. Maybe it's getting to know people who are currently experiencing homelessness in your city. Or maybe it's mentoring someone who's recovering from an addiction. Whatever it is, you can learn more about restoring well-being at www.life.church/neighbor. But remember that the best next step is the one that you take. So just do something, and you might be surprised at what can happen as a result.
I'm sitting here in a big cold room recording this. Where are you? If you're alone, will you do something for us? Will you make sure you find some friends, family, or neighbors to talk to about everything you're hearing? We've made that super easy to do with a conversation guide. Think of it as like a cheat sheet for having great conversations. And I promise it's going to help you start a great conversation, and you can find it in the show notes of every episode. Thanks, and have a great week.